Laudetur Jesus Christus. Praised be Jesus Christ. Welcome to this live broadcast from the Presidential Palace in Valletta, Malta, as Pope Francis prepares to make his first public event on his 2-day visit to Malta, where he will shortly meet authorities and members of the diplomatic corps, as well as the President of Malta, to commence his apostolic visitation to the island. On behalf of Vatican Media, I would like to welcome you to this broadcast. Some of you may be joining us through various channels associated with Vatican Media, such as the Vatican Audio Live Events app, the Radio Vaticana app, the Vatican News website, or the Vatican News English YouTube channel or Facebook live feed. To all of you joining us through Catholic TV, Catholic Faith Network, Shalom World Television Networks USA, EWTN TV, Salt and Light TV, Atmadarshan TV, Shalom TV India, Luminous Radio India, and Radio Maria Papua New Guinea, as well as all of the radio stations and internet sites throughout the world, a very warm welcome to you all this morning. My name is Ben Sinclair, and I will be providing the English language commentary for today's meeting, and I'm delighted to bring you live coverage from this meeting as Pope Francis makes his 36th apostolic visitation as Roman Pontiff. The Holy Father left Rome early this morning, but before doing so, he met with some families of refugees from Ukraine, hosted by the community of Sant'Egidio, and accompanied by the Papal Almoner. One of the families consisted of a 37-year-old mother with 2 little girls, aged 5 and 7 years old, who arrived in Italy from Lviv about 20 days ago. The youngest girl has undergone cardiological surgery and is under medical supervision in Rome. And also present at that meeting were 2 mothers from Ternopoli, sisters-in-law with their 4 children, between 10 and 17 years old, and are now hosted in an apartment by an Italian lady. And they also arrived in Rome just over 20 days ago. The children of the 2 families attend school in Rome, and a last family arrived in Rome from Kiev just 3 days ago, passing through Poland, and there are 6 members in that family. The mother and father with 3 children who are 10, 16 and 8 years old, as well as a grandmother who is 75. And they too live in a house offered by an Italian lady specifically for the reception of refugees. After this meeting, the Pope transferred by car to Rome Fiumicino Airport, where he left for Malta, and upon arrival, during the flight actually, he was asked a question about whether he himself would be opening to travelling to Ukraine. And the Pope's response was that it was certainly a possibility that he is considering. Also on the flight, the Pope received a gift which was painted by a migrant named Daniel. Daniel will have the opportunity to meet the Holy Father on Sunday, and he remembers his own shipwreck, but above all, in the ways he was unfortunately not able to save the lives of his companions. And the Pope himself remembered Daniel because he recognised the hand depicted on the picture which Daniel gave to him, which is similar to another which Daniel had also gifted to Pope Francis. On arrival to Malta, he was greeted by the Apostolic Nuncio and the Maltese ambassador to the Holy See, as well as by the President of Malta. Pope Francis is the 3rd Pope to visit Malta, but this apostolic visitation is the 4th of a Roman pontiff to the Mediterranean nation. The first Pope to travel to Malta was Pope St. John Paul II, who visited for 2 days as part of his Jubilee pilgrimage to Greece, Syria and Malta, following in the footsteps of the Apostle St. Paul. Pope Benedict XVI also visited the island for a 2-day pastoral visitation in 2010, which marked the occasion of the 1950th anniversary of St. Paul's shipwreck on the island. Upon his arrival earlier this morning, the Holy Father was greeted by the President of Malta, Mr. George Vela, as well as 2 children who offered him a gift of flowers. After being presented to various delegates and receiving a guard of honour, Pope Francis then travelled to the Presidential Palace, privately meeting the President, his wife Miriam, as well as other dignitaries, such as the Prime Minister, Robert Abela, and his family. And the Prime Minister's daughter gave a gift to the Holy Father, which was a project from her school. And you can just see how much of a joyful occasion it was for all of the family to be meeting the Holy Father during this the first few moments that he has been in Malta. And the Holy Father is now currently preparing for a meeting with around 150 members of the diplomatic corps, as well as other authorities. And yesterday, before travelling to Malta, the Holy Father entrusted his apostolic journey to Malta to Our Lady. During the general audience on Wednesday, he called Malta a luminous land and his destination as a pilgrim himself in the footsteps of the Apostle St. Paul. This is because it was on Malta that Paul was welcomed with great humanity after being shipwrecked at sea on his way to Rome. And it is on Malta that the Pope hopes to touch firsthand the wellsprings of the proclamation of the Gospel, to know at first hand a Christian community with a very lively history stretching back thousands of years, and to meet the inhabitants of the country that lies at the centre of the Mediterranean and in the south of the European continent, which today is increasingly engaged in welcoming so many brothers and sisters who are seeking refuge. And yesterday, the Vatican Secretary for State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, also stressed the need for a common commitment to saving lives, hoping that the Pope's visit to the Mediterranean nation will focus on those in need, the phenomenon of migration, and the hope that all wars will cease, including the one in Ukraine. And as we see live images now in the piazza outside the presidential palace, we can see many families, young people, children, gathered outside in eager expectation to meet the Holy Father and to see him emerge from the presidential palace at the end of this meeting. He was welcomed with huge crowds who were lining the streets, eagerly cheering and waving their flags. And we see as well a banner which says in Maltese, Merhaba Papa Franciscu, which is Hello Pope Francis. And this pilgrimage to Malta has been very expected because the Pope Francis was originally meant to visit the island nation in 2019. However, the meeting has been postponed twice due to the coronavirus pandemic. Sorry? And there has also been, just like in every apostolic visitation, a special logo which has been prepared for this apostolic visitation. And the logo features hands uplifted towards the cross as they emerge from a boat battling the waves, echoing that of St. Paul's shipwreck during his transport to Rome. And the motto for this apostolic journey is, "They showed us unusual kindness, which comes from the Acts of the Apostles." And this is because and again, we're seeing once more now many young people there cheering and looking forward to this visitation. And yes, so the motto for this visit comes from the Acts of the Apostles, with the motto, "They showed us unusual kindness." And this is because during St. Paul's voyage to Rome as a prisoner, the boat transporting him became caught in a storm and involved in a shipwreck. When they came across the island, later to be identified as Malta, an angel appeared to Paul, telling him that their lives would be spared. And during his stay on the island, the apostle also survived a snake bite and received excellent hospitality from the native citizens of Malta. And we now see the Holy Father making his way into the meeting room to be greeted by the 150 or so people from the diplomatic corps and other authorities as he begins this first official public meeting on his 2-day apostolic visitation to the island nation of Malta. And we hear first from the President of the Republic of Malta, His Excellency Mr. George William Vela.
Your Holiness Pope Francis, Honourable Prime Minister, President of the House of Representatives, His Grace Monsignor Archbishop, His Honour the Chief Justice, Honourable Ministers, Honourable Leader of the Opposition, colleagues, Presidents Emeriti, Excellencies, distinguished guests. Most Holy Father, I am humbled and fortunate in welcoming you on behalf of the government and the people of Malta. This is a long-awaited visit, which we all have been anxiously waiting for. It comes as a further consolidation of the very close historical relations between Malta and the Holy See, which over time have gone from strength to strength. I recall vividly that we had mentioned the possibility of a visit by Your Holiness to Malta as early as September 2019, when you welcomed me at the Vatican, and then again when you came to speak to me following the Mass for the repose of the soul of His Eminence Cardinal Prospero Grech in January 2020. On both occasions, I was very touched by your interest in Malta, the regional challenges that surround our islands, and above all, by your personal appreciation of the qualities and values that distinguish us Maltese. The sentiments extolling these same virtues were expressed by Your Holiness in various general audiences. So many things have changed since these meetings. The international community was shaken to its core by a pandemic that is still wreaking havoc on our health and our economies, and which is teaching us lessons in human solidarity which we should never forget. It has taught us that we evidently need to work harder to strengthen global social justice. Most importantly, the sharing of resources, be they human or material. Huge disparities continue to prevail, not only on the economic level, but in the access to basic health and medical needs, starting off with vaccines, but also in relation to employment, education, mobility, human rights, freedom of expression, and democracy. We need to think of and collectively adopt new and higher standards of global solidarity that do away with individualism, isolation, populism, ostracism, and xenophobia. A further shock to the international political system and to all of us individually came with the horrible and atrocious war in Ukraine. 75 years following World War II, Europe is tragically witnessing a dreadful war and the spilling of blood on its soil once again. The indiscriminate attacks on innocent lives, resulting in deaths, uprooting, and displacement, are episodes the world believed it would never see again in Europe. This is not because we have forgotten our history. It is because war and everything connected to it is unacceptable by modern standards and unthinkable, even in this day and age. Even though we have almost become complacent to the long years of war and destruction in countries like Yemen, Rwanda, Syria, and other countries around the globe. This war in Ukraine has brought out the worst and the best of humanity. Against a backdrop of unprovoked destruction and desperation, we are seeing unity, we are seeing empathy, and also a sense of solidarity amongst nations, something we had not experienced in generations. I join Your Holiness in your consistent and repeated appeals for the immediate cessation of these horrendous attacks as we continue to provide all the required assistance to the most vulnerable victims of this war. We need to reflect on what kind of legacy we want to leave behind us for future generations. Unfortunately, we are all absorbed with war and destruction when our undivided attention should be elsewhere. Holy Father, our planet is sick. Our planet is angry and tired. Yet, we keep ignoring its manifest signs of environmental degradation, climate change, and exploitation of its resources. Are we giving enough attention to the manifest signals that the planet is sending to us? Or do we need more convincing evidence that both the human and natural environment are increasingly deteriorating at an alarmingly fast pace? We cannot ignore the fact that the human and natural environment are intrinsically interlinked. A viable and sustainable ecology can only be one that preserves and nurtures the human, social, and environmental dimensions. Despite several initiatives, all good intentions and repeated promises, we are a far cry from achieving our environment and development goals. It defies reason why humanity remains intent on destroying or replacing nature's beauty with its own creations. Commitments on sustainability are easy to pronounce, but difficult to achieve and to maintain. As I have already stated, conflicts prevail and persist all around us in this global village, and we are tempted somehow to turn a blind eye, if not openly justify their existence. The temptation to ignore them or to look elsewhere is very strong. It could be because of our own interests and ambitions. It could be because of the weakness in regulatory mechanisms meant to address them at local, regional, and international levels, or because of worrying double standards applied discriminately. The common denominator to all conflicts remains the proliferation and sales of armaments, weapons, and ammunition. This is, as has been repeatedly emphasized by Your Holiness, the bread and butter of the armaments industry on which thrive whole national economies. We see this taking place in our immediate neighborhood, the Mediterranean, but even further afield in the long-drawn crisis of countries like Syria and Yemen, which I have already made reference to. In our region and across the globe, and for agreement with Your Holiness, I would like to see less proliferation of weapons and ammunition, less commercialization, and a cessation to the arms race that only leads to protracted violence, division, humanitarian crisis, fleeing from conflict zones, as well as deaths resulting from the inability of food and medicines to arrive at conflict zones. Rest assured, Holy Father, that Malta will continue to fulfill its principled mission of promoting dialogue and mutual respect between the countries, the cultures, and the religions that make our shared Mediterranean Sea a unique one. Building peace is still Malta's vocation, and we will not relent on our determination to continue working in this direction. We will continue to actively seek a humane, just, and equitable solution to the issues of irregular migration. Holy Father, we know how deeply you feel about this issue, and we all feel your pain and disillusionment whenever dead bodies are washed on our shores and when migrants arrive in pitiful situations, if they manage to make it at all. Malta has never shied away from its commitments and obligations to save lives. We have done this, and we will continue to do it. However, considering our size and carrying capacity, we continue to ask for solidarity from other countries that are not on the front line, but have the resources, the opportunities, and the potential to welcome migrants. Documents, action plans, and negotiated policies will lead us nowhere unless there is the political will to act and to implement what is agreed upon. In this context, allow me, Holy Father, to underline our appreciation of the theme that has been identified to commemorate your visit. They showed us unusual kindness, lifted from the Acts of the Apostles. May I recall the immense work which the ecclesial community has carried out throughout our history and is still doing throughout its institutions and parishes. This kindness will continue to spread and live up to as a nation when responding to the suffering of others. We are presently doing this in the actions taken by government and people of Malta in support of our Ukrainian brethren through the provision of humanitarian aid and the attention given to sick children. Holy Father, it is not my intention to labor your visit only with these pressing concerns, which we continue to address both as an independent country but also with our partners as active members of the international community. With these problems, I will therefore also dare to mention some possible solutions. I need not search far and long for them. We can all benefit from the ample wisdom contained in the inspiring writings of Your Holiness, that Your Holiness shares with the world on a regular basis. I have in mind documents like Fratelli Tutti, Laudato Si, and the document on human fraternity for world peace and living together, to mention only a few. I also find encouragement, indeed solace, when I read your message for the World Peace Day in January of this year, with its clear policies for the achievement of peace, decrying war and conflict, individualism, and environmental degradation. We have to turn a page. We can begin by regaining mutual trust, by speaking more to one another. We can start with more intergenerational exchanges and we need to fortify the nexus between education, teaching, and peace. And we need to safeguard dignified work as the foundation of justice and solidarity. We should also better value the role of women in all societies and increasingly place our youth at the helm of positive change and at the heart of peaceful coexistence. This is a journey we need to walk together. This is what lies behind your promotion of the concept of synodality. We need to create and invest our energies in a universal and inclusive process in which everyone's voice is heard and in which there is the widest possible participation. Above all, Your Holiness, Malta will remain faithful to the pledge of looking after the most vulnerable in our community, those who are alone, those who are weakened by physical and psychological pain, those who feel unwanted, and those who are forced to suffer in silence. Finally, we should all respect the sanctity of life from its beginning to its natural end. Santità, Aziz Missierna Franġisku, tal-li ġejt iżżurna.
And the President is now addressing the Holy Father and the other dignitaries in Maltese. He says, Your Holiness, our dear Father Francis, in the name of the Maltese people, I assure you of our deep gratitude to your visit, and we welcome you with great affection to our islands. Thanks to your visit, we will commit ourselves even more to unity among us and for peace in our region. Above all, we promise to keep you in our thoughts, and as you always ask us to do, we promise to continue to pray for you.
Signor Presidente della Repubblica,
And now we hear from His Holiness Pope Francis. Mr. President of the Republic, members of government and the diplomatic corps, distinguished religious and civil authorities, representatives of social and cultural life, ladies and gentlemen, I greet you cordially and I thank you, Mr. President, for your gracious words of welcome on behalf of your fellow citizens. Your ancestors showed hospitality to the Apostle Paul in his journey to Rome, treating him and his travelling companions with unusual kindness. Coming from Rome, I too am now experiencing that same warm hospitality, a treasure that the Maltese people have handed on from generation to generation. Thanks to its geographical position, Malta can be called the heart of the Mediterranean, not only by its geography. For thousands of years, the interplay of historical events and the encounter of different peoples has made this island a centre of vitality and culture, spirituality and beauty, a crossroads that has received and harmonised influences from many parts of the world. This variety of influences makes us think of the various winds that sweep this country. Not by chance, in the ancient maps of the Mediterranean, the compass rose, or rose of winds, was often depicted near the island of Malta. I would like to borrow that image of the rose of winds, which describes the winds in terms of the 4 cardinal points of the compass, to describe 4 fundamental influences for the social and political life of this country. It is prevalently from the northwest that the winds blow on the Maltese islands. The north recalls Europe, especially the home represented by the European Union, built as a dwelling place for a single great family united in maintaining peace. Unity and peace are the gifts that the Maltese people implore from God whenever your national anthem is sung. The prayer written by Dun Carm Pasaila says, "Grant, Almighty God, wisdom to those who govern, strength to those who work, affirm unity among the Maltese people, and peace." Peace follows unity and rises up from it. This reminds us of the importance of working together, of preferring cohesion to division, and of strengthening the sacred roots and values that have forged Maltese society in its uniqueness. To ensure a sound social coexistence, however, it is not enough to strengthen the sense of belonging. There is a need to shore up the foundations of life in society, which rests on law and legality. Honesty, justice, a sense of duty, and transparency are the essential pillars of a mature civil society. May your commitment to eliminate illegality and corruption be strong, like the north wind that sweeps the coasts of this country. May you always cultivate legality and transparency, which will enable the eradication of corruption and criminality, neither of which acts openly and in broad daylight. The European home, committed to promoting the values of justice and social equality, is also in forefront of efforts to protect the larger home that is God's creation. The environment in which we live is a gift from heaven, as your national anthem also recognizes, by asking God to preserve the beauty of this land, a mother dressed by brightest light. In Malta, where the luminous beauty of the landscape alleviates difficulties, creation appears as the gift that, amid the trials of history and life, reminds us of the beauty of our life on earth. It must therefore be kept safe from rapacious greed, from avarice, and from construction speculation, which compromises not only the landscape, but the very future. Indeed, the protection of the environment and the promotion of social justice prepare for the future and are optimal ways to instill in young people a passion for healthy politics and to shield them from the temptation to indifference and to a lack of commitment. The north wind often blends with blowing from the west. This European country, especially in its young people, shares Western lifestyles and thinking. This brings many great benefits. I think of the values of freedom and of democracy, but also risks, which call for vigilance, lest the desire for progress be accompanied by detachment from your own roots. Malta is a splendid laboratory of organic development, where progress does not mean cutting one's roots with the past in the name of a false prosperity dictated by profit, by needs created by consumerism. No, they don't signify this, and to say nothing of the right to have each and every right. A sound development needs to preserve the memory of the past and to foster respect. To preserve the memory of the past and foster respect and harmony between the generations, without yielding to bland uniformity and to forms of ideological colonization. And they often come during various parts of life. And this often happens to people before or even during conception. The basis of all solid growth is respect for the human person, respect for the life, and dignity of every man and every woman. I am already aware of the commitment of the Maltese people to embracing and protecting life. Already in the Acts of the Apostles, the people of this island were known for saving many lives. I encourage you to continue to defend life from its beginning to its natural end, but also to protect it at every moment from being cast aside and deprived of care and concern. I think especially of the rightful dignity of workers, the elderly and the sick, and of those young people who risk squandering all the goods they have within them by following mirages that leave only emptiness in their wake. These are the fruits of radical consumerism, indifferent to the needs of others, and the scourge of drugs, which suppresses freedom and creates dependence. So let us protect the beauty of life. Continuing to follow the rows of winds, we now look to the south, from where so many of our brothers and sisters have come in search of hope. I would like to thank the civil authorities and the people of Malta for the welcome they have given them in the name of the gospel, our common humanity, and of their native sense of hospitality. According to its Phoenician etymology, Malta means safe harbour. Nonetheless, given the growing influx of recent years, fear and insecurity have nurtured a certain discouragement and frustration. If the complexity of the migration issue is to be properly addressed, it needs to be situated within a broader context of time and space. Time, in the sense that migration phenomena is not a temporary situation, but a sign of our times. It brings with it the burden of past injustice, exploitation, climate changes, and tragic conflicts, whose effects are now making themselves felt. From the poor and densely populated south, great numbers of people are moving to the wealthy north, and this is a fact, and it cannot be ignored by adopting an anachronistic isolationism, which will not produce prosperity and integration. From the standpoint of space, the growing migration emergency. Here we can think of the refugees from war-torn Ukraine, calls for a broad-based and a shared response. Some countries cannot respond to the entire problem, while others remain indifferent onlookers. Civilized countries cannot approve for their own interests sordid agreements with criminals who enslave other human beings, but unfortunately this happens. The Mediterranean needs co-responsibility on the part of Europe in order to become a new theatre of solidarity and not the harbinger of a tragic shipwreck of civilization. We cannot forget the biggest cemetery in Europe. With this mention of shipwreck, my thoughts turn to St. Paul, who in the course of his last journey across the Mediterranean unexpectedly came to these shores and found assistance. Then, bitten by a viper, he was thought to be a criminal, but then came to be considered a god because he suffered no ill effects from it. Between these two extremes, the really important thing was missed. Paul was a man in need of assistance. Humanity is first and foremost. That is the lesson taught by this country, whose history was blessed by the arrival of the shipwrecked apostle. In the name of the gospel that Paul lived and preached, let us open our hearts and rediscover the beauty of serving our neighbours in need. Let us continue along this route. Today, when those who cross the Mediterranean in search of salvation are met with fear and the narrative of invasion, and safeguarding one's own security at any price seems to be the primary goal, let us help one another not to view the migrant as a threat, and not to yield to the temptation of raising drawbridges and erecting walls. Other people are not a virus from which we need to be protected, but persons to be accepted. For that matter, the Christian ideal always to be a summons to overcome suspicion, ingrained mistrust, fear of losing our privacy, all those defensive attitudes which today's world imposes on us. May we not allow indifference to stifle our dream of living as one. Certainly, acceptance entails effort and requires renunciations. So it was in the experience of St. Paul. To save the ship, it was necessary to sacrifice the merchandise it was carrying. Yet every sacrifice, every renunciation made for a greater good, for life of man who is the treasure of God, is holy. Finally, there is the wind coming from the east, which often blows at dawn, which is why Homer calls it the Euros. Yet from the east, from the land of sunrise, the dark shadows of war have now spread. We have thought that the invasions of other countries, savage street fighting and atomic threats were grim memories of a distant past. However, the icy winds of war, which bring only death, destruction, and hatred in their wake, have swept down powerfully upon the lives of many people, and they have affected us all. And once again, some powerful person sadly caught up in anachronistic claims of nationalist interests is provoking and fomenting conflicts, whereas ordinary people sense the need to build a future that will either be shared or not be at all. Now in the night of war that is fallen upon humanity, please, let us not allow the dream of peace to fade. Malta, which shines brilliantly in the heart of the Mediterranean, can serve as an inspiration to us, for it is urgent to restore beauty to the face of a humanity marred by war. A beautiful Mediterranean statue dating back centuries before Christ depicts peace as a woman, Irene, holding in her arms Plotus and wealth. That statue reminds us that peace generates prosperity and war only poverty. Significantly, in that statue, peace and prosperity are depicted as a mother holding her child in her arms. The tender love of mothers who give life to the world and the presence of women are the true alternative to the baneful logic of power that leads to war. We need compassion and care, not ideological and populist visions which are fueled by wars, by words of hatred and unconcern for the concrete life of the people, ordinary people. Over 60 years ago, in a world menaced by destruction, where law was dictated by ideological conflicts and the grim logic of blocks, a different voice was raised from the Mediterranean basin, countering the exaltation of self-interests with a call for a prophetic leap in the name of universal fraternity. It was the voice of George Lapira, who stated that the historic juncture in which we are living, the clash of interests and ideologies that shake a humanity in prey to incredible childishness, restore to the Mediterranean a capital responsibility. It is that of defining once more the rule of a moderation in which man, abandoned to the madness and lack of moderation, can recognize himself. Those timely words, and we can repeat them again. How much we need a human moderation before the infantile and destructive aggression that threatens us, before the risk of an enlarged Cold War that can stifle the life of entire peoples and generations. That childishness, sadly, has not disappeared. It has re-emerged powerfully in the seductions of autocracy, new forms of imperialism, widespread aggressiveness, and the inability to build bridges and to start from the poorest in our midst. It's very... We need to think with the logic of peace, not with the logic of war. It is from there that the cold wind of war begins to blow, and it is at this time it has been encouraged over the years. War has in fact been prepared for some time by great investments in weaponry and a massive trade in arms. It is distressing to see how the enthusiasm for peace which emerged after the Second World War has faded in these recent decades, as has the progress of the international community, with a few powers who go ahead on their own account, seeking spaces and zones of influence. And in this way, not only peace, but also many questions, like the fight against hunger and inequality, are no longer on the list of the main political agendas. But the solution to the crisis of each is care for those of all of us, since global problems require global solutions. Let us help one another to sense people's yearning for peace. Let us work to lay the foundations of an ever more expanded dialogue. Let us go back to gathering in international peace conferences, where the theme of disarmament will have a central place, and where our thoughts will turn to future generations, and where the enormous funds that continue to be destined to weaponry may be diverted to development, healthcare and nutrition. Looking once more to the east, I would like to devote a final thought to the nearby Middle East, whose languages harmonized with others are reflected in the native language of this nation, as if to recall the capacity of the Maltese people to generate beneficial forms of coexistence in a conviviality of differences. And this is what the Middle East needs. Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and other contexts torn, and other countries torn by problems and violence. May Malta, the heart of the Mediterranean, continue to foster the heartbeat of hope, care for life, acceptance of others, yearning for peace, with the help of God whose name is peace. May God bless Malta and Gozo. And we've heard now the two speeches, the first from the President of Malta and secondly of the Holy Father Pope Francis, both of whom were talking about the great need for peace in the world, to reduce the level of conflict, and also in order to create better conditions for every man and woman, regardless of who they are. And this ends the live broadcast from today's first meeting of Pope Francis with members of the diplomatic corps and authorities as he begins his 36th apostolic visitation. The Holy Father will travel to the neighbouring island of Gozo by catamaran now, and later today he will lead a time of prayer at the Basilica of the National Shrine of Tapinu in Gozo later this evening, and will be back later live today at 5:30 Rome time in order to bring you coverage of the prayer meeting. Please visit the Vatican News web portal, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and YouTube accounts for coverage of today's meeting, as well as other Vatican and world news. On behalf of the Vatican media, I would like to thank all of the technicians who made this broadcast possible, and all of you for joining us. Laudate, praise be Jesus Christ, laudetur Jesus Christus.
Possiamo pregare con il Papa, possiamo chiedere questo. E io non vorrei che si riavvenara. 1, 2, 3, Papa Francesco!
And we hear we see the Pope now making his way onto the balcony and greeting all of the many pilgrims who have joined him there. They've called his name, and many people have been cheering him, and he's responded with a wave to them all.
Viva il Papa! Viva il Papa! Hey! Sua Santità, per un'altra volta possiamo chiedere una piccola preghiera.
And the Pope is now going to address people in prayer.
The Son and the Holy Spirit.
And after receiving the blessing of Pope Francis, the crowd continue in great joy to shout the name of the Holy Father, a journey which has been long awaited.
Vera għanna xalxiex inkunu xċortjati li ġi ġewwa l-gżira tagħna u x'hekk. minkejja l-età tiegħu u minkejja ovvjament id-diffikultajiet li qed isib abba is-saħħa.
And so we've just heard before the Holy Father went and greeted the people, the many young people awaiting him in the presidential palace outside. We heard once more from the speeches of the President of Malta and the Holy Father, that joint need of peace in the world and of equal opportunities for everyone, regardless of their situation, whether they're from a migrant background or one of the dignitaries present today. And we saw that before leaving the balcony, the Holy Father posed for a photo with the members of the Parliament, and as well as the various bishops and other dignitaries who were involved in throughout this meeting. And after this first meeting from the presidential palace here in Malta, after meeting the president of the Maltese Republic, as well as the Prime Minister and his family, as well as all of the other dignitaries and authorities who have welcomed the Holy Father to this island for the 2-day meeting in Malta as part of his 36th apostolic visitation as Roman Pontiff. He will now make his way over to the neighbouring island of Gozo by catamaran, and from there later today he will lead a time of prayer at the Basilica of the National Shrine of Tarpinu in Gozo later this evening. And we'll be back live again later today at 5:30 p.m. Rome time, and we will be bringing you more live coverage of the prayer meeting. And please visit the Vatican News web portal, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and YouTube accounts for coverage of today's meeting, as well as other Vatican and world news. On behalf of Vatican Media, I would like to thank all of the technicians who made this broadcast possible, and for all of you joining us. Praised be Jesus Christ. Laudetur Jesus Christus.
Deeper than the sea, stronger than a water bravery, richer than our history, bigger than our dreams could ever be. There's a love the whole world knows. It's love.
Grazie signore, complimenti per i lavori voi.
Stavo dicendo il lavoro che avete fatto nell'ascensore.
Eżiżaza ta' Malta, il-mitusija tiegħu Papa Francisco! Inselmulu.
Papa Francesco! Papa Francesco! Viva il Papa! 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 Dita kulħadd ixejjer il-bnader tagħha!
Ekku l-ħartit. U aħna naħseb l-aġġornament tagħna jiqafaw. Nixtieq ringrazzjaw il-kull wieħed waħda minnhom.
Grazzi
Tal-li Tistgħu tibdew toħorġu bil-mod bil-kawtela. L-kumplament
l-galbu ħalli ħadd ovvjament ma jweġġa.
tajjeb ħafna l-kumplament tal-ġurnata tajba.
Grazzi lil kulħadd u jalla xi ħaġa li dejjem jispiċċa biha lill-Papa nibqgħu nżommu fit-talb tagħna. Grazzi lil kulħadd.
Jammu. La sej, prosit.